In recent months, we've seen some severe criticism of the standard of corporate governance in New Zealand emerging from various quarters. From the collapse of the finance companies, to Ross Asset Management, to the Fonterra contamination scam, the blame for much of the malaise of these industries, these organisations, has been laid squarely and fairly at the door of the boards of directors of the various organisations involved. Specifically, the experience of Rakon Ltd has caused some more recent concern, and it's this case that I intend to examine more closely during this presentation. The Australian Stock Exchange best practice recommendations define corporate governance as the framework of rules, relationships, systems and processes within and by which authority is exercised and controlled in corporations. It encompasses the mechanisms by which companies and those in control are held to account. Corporate governance influences how the objectives of the company are set and achieved, how risk is monitored and assessed, and how performance is optimized. Effective corporate governance structures encourage companies to create value through entrepreneurialism, innovation, development and exploration, and provide accountability and control systems commensurate with the risks involved. With that definition in mind, let's look more closely at Rakon Ltd. Rakon was listed in the New Zealand Stock Exchange in 2007 at $1.60, and by 2008, 12 months later, had reached the share price of $5.80. It was recently valued per share at 22 cents per dollar, with a recorded loss in 31st of March 2013, $32.8 million, and a projected loss for the next financial year of $54 million. So how has this sad state of affairs come to pass? There have been symptoms of inappropriate corporate governance emerging at Rakon for some time now. It's a closely held company amongst the Robinson family, with the chairman Brian Mogridge and an independent director on board. In June 2012, the Robinsons increased their own executive salaries during the same financial period that the value of the shares were halved. This would have been a particularly distasteful decision from the shareholders' perspective, but nevertheless the board of directors all voted in favour of the increased remuneration. In July that same year, the directors' fees were requested to be increased to cover a new appointment for his expertise in the China market. Chairman Mogridge quoted, in light of recent events, that Brent Robinson had had 33 years experience in the industry, Darren Robinson 22 years experience, and the founder, Warren Robinson, 45 years experience. Direct quote from the chairman: "In this industry, clearly experience is essential for long-term success." It would appear from the events over the past 5 years that the long-term success has eluded Rakon, its directors and its executive. All three Robinsons sit on the board, but it is of concern, for example, that Darren Robinson, who is the marketing director, also sits on the board. Again, Chairman Brian Mogridge justifies this by saying that the board's view is that it is critical to have the commitment of the marketing director around the board table. He doesn't get paid any extra for being a director, he just takes more risk. Unfortunately, shareholders may see that from a different perspective, as it's the shareholders who seem to be sustaining most of the risk that incurs in the losses that Rakon have experienced. in other examples of poor corporate governance, it's been revealed that the takeover code issued by the New Zealand Stock Exchange was breached this year when the Robinson family increased the shareholding beyond the 20% level permitted without the expressed permission of the other shareholders. Similarly, the sale of the China factory asset breached New Zealand Stock Exchange listing rules. The conducting of the transaction exceeded 50% of the company's average market cap in the 20 days leading up to the announcement. Such a transaction also requires shareholder approval. The board of directors did not seek this approval and breached the New Zealand listing rules, stock exchange listing rules. So there's been a litany of poor corporate governance within the organisation, and it culminates in the most recent events where around about an hour before the company annual shareholders meeting and special shareholders meeting, where the loss was forecast to be 54 million for the coming year. The signing of the announcement, of course, meant that any proxy votes which had been cast would have been unable to have been altered in the light of the new financial forecast. Thus, the directors and the board were re-elected, which, not surprisingly, raised the ire of the Shareholders Association, whose chairman, John Hawkins, uttered these words: "The reality is that the grand strategy championed by Mr. Moggridge is in tatters. As a result, shareholders face having to write off $30 million. Rakon had been one of the worst performers on the stock exchange," he said, "and it was time for Moggridge to go." Hawkins also said that the Robinson family board's representation was too large, given its 23% shareholding, and that Darren Robinson's executive position as sales manager compromised his role on the board. So the point about the family shareholding at 23% does not necessarily militate for poor corporate governance. A number of family-held companies have made the transition to listed companies quite successfully. One of the most outstanding examples of that would be Michael Hill Jeweller. But how does Rakon get itself out of this quandary? How does it escape the dilemma of declining share prices, declining profits, climbing losses, and shareholder dissatisfaction with the board's performance? Well, as tough as it might be for the founders and the family members who put the whole organisation together, I feel that the board has to step down and that there has to be replacement directors and a new chairman appointed. Quite simply, the current team have failed to meet shareholder expectations, and their continued presence on the board is likely to result in further losses, and who knows, eventually the company may well collapse. So I think the time has come for the directors of Rakon to stand down, make way for new blood, and to appoint new directors and a new chairman, develop a new strategy to turn the organisation round, make some radical changes, and alter the direction of the organisation. In practical terms, Cotter's 8 steps to change management should be deployed and take the company forward into a new future with better prospects and a different perspective on development. Thank you.